West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Tonight, NBC News is verifying some of what are basically the worst fears about the apparent motivation behind the gun massacre that happened this weekend in Allen, Texas. And there's so much that is disgusting and unsettling about these latest killings, including sort of what they connect to. You might remember it was a year ago this week that a gunman motivated by white supremacist, racist ideology went to Buffalo, went into a supermarket in a black neighborhood in Buffalo and killed 10 African Americans in that market. That was a year ago this week. That killer claimed he did that. He massacred all those people in that supermarket. He said he did it because of the Great Replacement theory, which you can hear all about on the Fox News channel. He said he did it because of the Great Replacement theory and because of white genocide, which you can hear all about on right-wing talk radio. He killed 10 people and injured even more people than that. He got, in February this year, he was sentenced to 11 life sentences. That Buffalo attack, again, was a year ago this week. Also, the connection to Allen, Texas. Allen, Texas is where this latest massacre was this weekend. Allen, Texas is also where the shooter was living from the El Paso massacre. Allen, Texas is where the guy started his road trip to that Walmart in El Paso in 2019, where he shot and killed 23 people, almost all of whom were Latino. Again, the killer there ranting that he did it because of the Great Replacement theory, popularized on the Fox News channel in primetime. Well, now today in Allen, Texas, we're learning more about the apparent motive in killing all these people this weekend. It is not a subtle thing. The gunman is believed to have recently posted this photo online. This picture and others like it appear to be him, appear to be pictures of himself from a couple of weeks ago. You see some of his nice, fresh tattoos there. NBC also reports that he had a long social media record online that included rants against Jews, against women, against racial minorities. NBC News also reporting that he posted a bunch of stuff online from white supremacist influencers, including the one who recently was apparently invited to Mar-a-Lago to dine with the former president at his South Florida home. There have also been reports that the gunman from Allen, Texas this weekend, he had a patch that was Velcroed onto the tactical vest he was wearing while he carried out the shooting, a patch that had the initials RWDS on it. Looks like this one. There's a patch of a similar kind shown on the tactical vest of the man who is the leader of the Proud Boys, pro-Trump right-wing paramilitary group. Until not that long ago, that Proud Boys leader had a merch store that sold this patch. RWDS stands for Right-Wing Death Squad. 4 leaders of the Proud Boys, the pro-Trump paramilitary group, were, of course, convicted of seditious conspiracy at the end of last week for their roles in the January 6th attack on Congress. One of those Proud Boys defendants who was just convicted of sedition, he had not just a patch of the right-wing death squad acronym, like the Allen, Texas shooter had. He actually had RWDS, right-wing death squad, tattooed on his arm, which you can see here. Today, also in federal court in Washington, D.C., we got a fairly heavy sentence handed down against yet another participant in the January 6th attack. He's 41 years old. He's a former petty officer first class in the U.S. Navy. Disturbingly, he reportedly carried top secret and compartmented information security clearances. He was already convicted and sentenced to 3 years in federal prison on charges related to him possessing illegal weapons, unregistered silencers. That was just a few months ago. Today, he got an additional 4 years on his sentence for his participation in the January 6th attack. And in the FBI affidavit that prosecutors submitted to the court in support of their case, that affidavit spells out his communications with FBI confidential informants, his coworkers and others, him spelling out and explaining to people why he was at the Capitol on January 6th with, he says, the Proud Boys. That affidavit also explains this man's very clear worldview for what exactly he was doing there that day, what he thought he was there to accomplish. This is from that FBI affidavit. Quote, Mr. Speed stormed the Capitol on January 6, 2021 to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power to President Biden, whom he believed rose to power through election fraud and was, quote, operated by the Jews. Mr. Speed was willing to act corruptly to achieve his goal and stop the certification, in part because he felt so passionately that he needed to defend himself and the United States against the country's Jews. He did not want the person he saw as a puppet of the Jews to take power. Mr. Speed also thought that more violence was needed on January 6th to pressure Congress to stop the certification, but that violence did not materialize because Jews had lulled Americans into support for nonviolence. Mr. Speed's deeply held anti-Semitism was a core part of his motive on January 6th. He told our undercover informant that he believed that America, a Christian country, was locked in a battle with the Jews. That's all this week. That's all at once. Of course, I didn't even mention, of course, all this is happening while we are in the middle of the trial of the white power, great replacement theory mass murderer from the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh. That trial's ongoing right now. And of course, all of these things have the same smell, right? They don't just happen to be connected in the news right now. They're connected. The Buffalo white supremacist mass murder, the El Paso white supremacist mass murder, the Pittsburgh synagogue white supremacist mass murder. Now it appears the Allen, Texas white supremacist mass murder. And in a nation recoiling and ashamed and disgusted, there's also these apparent connections, right? Between this bleeding, ragged, right-wing mass violence and the bleeding, ragged, right-wing edge of politics. The most mainstream possible electoral Republican politics. The most mainstream, most successful right-wing media as well. But also this former president and his family and his former officials and the way he is currently running for president again. They're inviting literal, Hitler was right, outspoken anti-Semites, putting stars of David, Jewish stars on the heads of their enemies, telling people that's who we need to be going after, just the way Hitler. They're inviting people like that to their events with the highest ranking former officials of their government. And it's all happening while that former president is running for president again. And it's happening amid this unrelenting wave of white supremacist motivated mass murder. Are those two things separate? Are those two things just very disturbing parallel tracks that will never meet and that have never met? Or is one of these things an anchor for the other? Does the fact that both of these things are happening at once in our country, frankly, accelerate them both? Accelerate the racial radicalism and anti-Semitism as a political tool, and also just accelerate the violence in the streets? Do they work together? And if so, how? And if they do work together, how do we stop it? Joining us now is someone who has devoted her professional career to the study of just this problem. She is Kathleen Belew. She's Associate Professor of History at Northwestern University. She's author of the seminal book, Bring the War Home, The White Power Movement and Paramilitary America. Professor Belew, I really appreciate you making time to be back with us again tonight. Thank you. Thank you for having me. So you can probably tell from that right through, from that wind-up, that I am disturbed. I'm unnerved, at least, by these two parallel tracks, by what we see happening with incredible racial and anti-Semitic radicalism adjacent to very mainstream electoral politics and the kind of mass violence that we are seeing. As somebody who's an expert and studies these matters, should we see these things as parallel, or are they lines that intersect?
I don't think we can anymore say that this is adjacent. I think that at least the Republican Party, insofar as it is represented by Donald Trump, has fully embraced many of these elements. The fact that this kind of speech is not only sort of waved through with a wink and a nod, but invited in. And we can see that in the invitation of people like Nick Fuentes to dinner at Mar-a-Lago, the invitation of Holocaust denial into the main sort of welcome of the candidate. And the one that was the most concerning for me as someone who studies this kind of violence was the staging of and the content of the press conference announcing the kickoff of this campaign in Waco, Texas. Now, many people know about the Branch Davidian siege in Waco as part of sort of a general anti-government sensibility. But to people on the far right, to people in neo-Nazi groups, white power groups, militant right groups, it is a call directly to the chain of events that leads to the Oklahoma City bombing, a major act of mass casualty domestic terrorism. It is a direct call to that kind of violence. It's not just about speech. It's direct and bloody, and it has real tolls like we see in Allen and El Paso and Buffalo and Pittsburgh. And as more and more and more of these communities are impacted, that toll just grows and grows.
It is Tuesday, the 9th of May of 2023. And you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays, a small, scant dash. A mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika will make all the difference in the world. It does. It really, truly does. Okay, well, I should give you fair warning. We may be pulled away at times to take care of a few things, and you know how it is when there's home care, and, well, I'm providing the home care, so Mom might need a little bit of attending to, but we'll see. If we happen to have a bit longer clips, that's the reason. I apologize ahead of time, but that stated, why don't we mitigate that possibility by giving you a quick rundown on what we have in store for you here in the Bistro Cafe as we begin in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Yes, radical right-wing mass violence sits dangerously close to Republican politics, and I think Rachel's breakdown on, shall we say, the shift to Nazism in our society, it's rearing its, tectonic head once again. And she's on the job exposing it, and we should pay heed. Yes. On the rest of the menu, the Minnesota Senate approved a paid family and medical leave plan, and that's a very good thing. Abortion providers in 3 states filed suit to protect their access to mifepristone pills, and the Pennsylvania House battle hinges on the Philadelphia suburbs. After the break, we move to the chef's table where workers at a Goodyear plant in Mexico voted to throw out an old guard union. I should mention an old guard union is one who's particularly wedded very close to corrupt politics and keeping wages low, because that's what a union does for their workers. And tens of thousands marched in silence in Serbia after the mass shootings there. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. Across the page to the left from that chat room link, and also the social media scroll is there too by the chat room link, but if you look across the page to the left and just down a skosh, you will then see the link to our Patreon site. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, and if you could afford to send us what you might spend on, I don't know, a pair of Bonbas? No, how about an espresso type coffee drink? Yeah, buy us a coffee. And if you could do that once a month, we're able to pool our coffee funds with other like-minded funded individuals or funding individuals. And they're a lot of fun, too. And that way we are able to put a big hit on our the bills that we pay. Yeah, we pay bills. We found that if you pay your bills, you can fly under the radar for a considerable time. And we've been doing it for over a dozen years. 12. And we have you to thank for helping us fulfill our civic duty, not only pay our bills, but fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended so many years ago. Over a dozen. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio. Thank you. Thank you for being so generous and truly helping us keep this powerhouse of resistance resisting. Alrighty. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, and or Spoutable, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thank you, Tom. Follow me on those social media sites. What are they again? Twitter, Mastodon, and or Spoutable. And you can do so at Justice Putnam. Fancy that. Now, of course, many of you have already heard, but I'll tell those who just happen to have been stopping by that I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's. You may think they're stories, but they're really diaries. Anyway, that diary gets posted 10 minutes before showtime, but you can always find the diaries, everything, even the playlist for my music show on Sundays. You can find that by going to the links to the show notes and links diaries. Then they can be found on those social media sites. So there. So follow me at Justice Putnam and you'll find out. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West. And most importantly, do please pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. They're everywhere. All right, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Did I tell you that yet? Yes, I did. It's by Steve Karnowski from the Associated Press. The Minnesota Senate approved a plan yesterday, Monday, to entitle workers across the state to paid leave when they're sick or caring for relatives who are ill. While Senate Democrats hold only a one-seat majority, paid family and medical leave has been a priority of the party for several years, and the final 34-33 vote followed party lines. The proposal passed the House last week on a 68-64 vote, and Democratic Governor Tim Walz is expected to sign the final version that emerges from a House-Senate conference committee. Well, you know, the GOP there should do what the GOP here in Oregon do, and that's just like not show up for work so you can never have a vote. No quorum, no vote. Am I giving them an idea? I'm just saying that these, what do I call the GOP now? I like to call them Nazis. They seem that way. They seem to be beholden or at least defensive of their little cadre of black and brown shirt stormtroopers. Anyway, what do we call them? Well, whatever we call them, they are obstructionists. And they will nullify anything that is democratic, small and little d. Now, the legislation would create an insurance-like system to allow workers to collect up to 12 weeks of partial wages when they take medical leave, including for pregnancy, and up to 12 weeks to take care of family members starting in 2025. Thanks. Replacement wages would range from 55% to 90%, just averaging about 66%. The benefits would be funded by a 0.7% payroll tax. Employers would charge half that expense to employees. They always say that's not enough. We got to let the employee take it home. Companies offering more generous benefits than the state requires could opt out. 11 other states and the District of Columbia already have similar programs, though Minnesota's would be among the most generous. Matthew Perrone and Denise Lavoie of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Abortion providers in 3 states filed a lawsuit yesterday, Monday, aimed at preserving access to the abortion pill mifepristone, even as the drug is threatened by a separate Texas lawsuit winding its way through the U.S. court system. The lawsuit filed in U.S. District Court in Virginia on behalf of clinics in Virginia, Montana, and Kansas is the largest legal action over the decades-old pill, which is part of the 2-drug regimen used in most U.S. abortions. A federal judge in Texas issued a ruling last month that would have revoked the U.S. Food and Drug Administration's long-standing approval of the pill, an unprecedented challenge to the federal drug regulator, but the Supreme Court blocked that decision and other limits from a lower court from taking effect while the lawsuit continues. Abortion rights advocates and their opponents continue jostling for a legal foothold on the issue across the country. The clinics in Virginia, Montana, and Kansas sued the FDA yesterday, Monday, in federal court to force the agency to drop several long-standing restrictions on how mifepristone can be prescribed. But from a practical standpoint, the group said they are seeking a court order that would shield mifepristone access in their states as the litigation of the drug proceeds. That is what 18 liberal states achieved last month when a federal judge in Washington state issued a ruling ordering the FDA to preserve access to mifepristone in those states, regardless of any conflicting court decisions. The ruling came shortly after the Texas decision, creating confusion for abortion providers and their patients. The plaintiffs in yesterday's lawsuit said they hope to prevent similar chaos as the legal battle over mifepristone accelerates. An appeals court in New Orleans is set to hear arguments in the Texas case later this month. Golforo of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Democrats who reclaimed the Pennsylvania House majority in November and clung to a one-seat margin by sweeping 3 special elections earlier this year face yet another contest for control of the chamber next week, when voters will fill a vacancy in the Philadelphia suburbs. At stake in the Delaware County special election is whether freshman Democratic Governor Josh Shapiro will have at least one chamber to aid his agenda going into the final month of budget negotiations. The result could also affect a proposed constitutional amendment on abortion rights that legislative Republicans are one House vote away from putting before voters as a referendum. The seat became open when Democratic Representative Mike Zabel resigned in March, a week after a lobbyist accused him by name of sexual harassment. A win by Republican candidate Katie Ford, a military veteran, school volunteer, and behavioral therapist, would likely give the House GOP a 102-101 majority and then power to reclaim control of the legislative agenda and the chamber's voting calendar. Speaker Joanna McClinton, a Philadelphia Democrat, has presided over the House since January, but the Democrat in the race, Heather Boyd, a former congressional and state legislative aide, is running in a district that has given solid margins to Democratic candidates in recent elections. Libertarian Alfie Goodwin, whose campaign focuses on criminal justice reform and fighting homelessness, is also on the ballot. During a debate between Ford and Boyd that was hosted by WHTM-TV in Harrisburg last week, Ford said she is against having Pennsylvania voters decide the abortion amendment, a Republican-crafted proposal which states that the Pennsylvania Constitution does not guarantee any rights relating to abortion or public funding of abortions. Ford said she is personally opposed to abortion, but would not seek to change existing state law. Boyd's effort to tie Ford to the long-standing Republican effort to ban or further restrict abortion access in Pennsylvania includes an ad in which Shapiro warns that a Republican House majority will move to strip him of veto power over anti-abortion legislation. Ford has focused her own campaign messaging on the Zabel scandal. She argues that Boyd did not respond sufficiently when she learned of Service Employees International Union lobbyist Andy Perez's account that Zabel caressed her leg while they discussed legislation outside the Capitol in 2018 and did not stop when she moved away from him. Zabel told the AP when he resigned in March that he had planned to defend himself through the House Ethics Committee, but ultimately decided he did not want to continue putting his loved ones through a public scandal because Don't be rubbing lobbyists' legs. Don't do it, no matter what party you are. And notice the big difference. I'm preaching to the choir, I know. But I think the difference is noticeable. How we would respond and how they, with a capital T, respond. Notwithstanding that Texas guy who said that, groomers like Antifa, pedo, Planned Parenthood, commies are to blame for the ills of America, and he had to step down because, well, what he did is he essentially raped a 19-year-old intern by getting her drunk and then having his way with her. Well, he did actually resign. So maybe there is hope in the world. All right, let us now go to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's Science Quickly. I'm Christopher Indagliata. When I first started working on this series about vernal pools and became convinced I had to go see some for myself, one of the things that surprised me the most was where people kept telling me to go to see them.
This landmark is by far the largest and most pristine concentration of vernal pools left in San Diego County and possibly in California.
We're standing in a preserve of hundreds of acres of wild land containing more than 1,000 vernal pools. It's also part of a Marine base outside San Diego, Marine Corps Air Station Miramar. And my tour guide was a wildlife biologist employed by the Department of Defense, a guy named Chuck Black.
Yeah, I never thought that I would be coming to a military base to find the natural resource.
Yeah, well, lots of people don't associate military bases with conservation efforts, but...
And it's true. When I think conservation, I think roadless stretches of the Sierra Nevada or remote patches of desert in the Mojave. But here, the natural wonder is sandwiched between a highway, a landfill, and a runway. And there's a reason the military base is the largest remaining stronghold of vernal pools along the Southern California coast. Lots of other stuff around here just got developed.
The flat mesa tops like this were the prime areas for development during the 18th, 19th, and 20th century.
The vernal pools became farmland, houses, shopping centers.
It's estimated that over 99% of the vernal pools that formerly existed in San Diego are not here any longer. Because of the development.
And if you look statewide, the numbers really aren't that different. And vernal pools are considered one of the most threatened ecosystems in the state.
A lot of people know that 90% of vernal pools have been lost from the Central Valley since European colonization. But what people don't know a lot about is that these losses are ongoing. This isn't just a historic problem.
This is Sean O'Brien. He's a senior wildlife biologist with ICF. That's a consulting firm. And he does biological surveys of vernal pools before developments. And he tries to recommend ways to avoid harming the vernal pools. And if that can't be avoided, then he advises ways to make up for the loss elsewhere. And he says there are a number of things today that threaten vernal pools and the things that live there. But there's one threat that stands out among the rest.
I think it's safe to say that habitat loss is the number one concern by a landslide.
A recent study by the vernal pool consultant Carol Witham showed that between 2005 and 2018, 9% of the Central Valley's remaining vernal pool habitat, that's 76,000 acres, was wiped out. And more than 90% of those losses were unmitigated. And what that means is the pools were destroyed without adhering to any regulations, which require documenting the loss or preserving pools or restoring them elsewhere to compensate. Witham's report says the majority of these pools are being destroyed to make way for vineyards and orchards.
And there are some consultants making a lot of money helping people do that.
And she explains that a lot of the habitat loss documented in her report is accomplished with a sort of tricky workaround.
It looks like in a lot of cases they avoided at least the larger vernal pools and only planted around them, not through them. But for all intents and purposes, that endangered species habitat, if it isn't already gone, it will be gone in very short order.
Vernal pools tend to be at the low spots. That's where the water pools. And it's also right where contaminated water from agriculture flows, which can kill things that are living in the pools. And so if the pools were eliminated by mistake like this, well, she says that's a lot harder to enforce.
This is part of the reluctance of the regulatory agencies to do enforcement actions because they can't prove that the activity killed endangered species because they didn't actually go in and screw up the vernal pools intentionally at the time they put in the trees. But over a very short period of time, all of their activity around the vernal pools will destroy the vernal pools.
You know, you got to feel for these ranchers, too, who see their neighbor just put in an orchard and became millionaires while they have done the right thing and not converted their vernal pool complex into an orchard. And they're not getting money out of that. They have no incentive to preserve their land.
Private ranchers are by far the biggest landholders of the Central Valley's remaining vernal pools. And to be fair, some ranchers are actively preserving the pools on their land through various types of conservation agreements. But even when they aren't, and vernal pools are being transformed into orchards, O'Brien says in some cases the fairy shrimp seem to follow that famous Jeff Goldblum line from Jurassic Park.
No, I'm simply saying that life finds a way.
You'll still see shrimp hatch out in these plowed fields. They certainly are resilient creatures.
Yeah, from a zoomed out on a very, very long view, I think fairy shrimp as a group are going to be okay.
I talked to Shannon Blair about this. She's a molecular ecologist at the University of Idaho, and she did a lot of work on fairy shrimp as a grad student and postdoc at the University of California, Davis.
I think the dangers of losing vernal pools is that they aren't just isolated habitats. They're deeply connected to the agricultural productivity of the region, to the wildlife and the migratory birds of the area, and they protect and support native amphibians. So you lose a lot more than just a pond when you lose a pond.
But just looking at the fairy shrimp, she says they're survivors, despite what humans might be able to throw at them.
They've lived through the breakup of Pangea. They've lived through the KT extinction. They've lived through the meteor that killed the dinosaurs. They've lived through multiple ice ages. And they are still, as an order, they're found all over the globe, in the deserts, in the Arctic, on rocky outcroppings. They're found in the rich jungles of South America. They're found on islands. They represent an ability to survive in very difficult, very changeable conditions. And they do that by sort of waiting until things are perfect before they emerge again, and changing rapidly and adapting rapidly to new environments as they arise.
Her point reminded me of something that Chuck Black had said while we were wandering the vernal pools at Miramar.
I've even seen fairy shrimp in the asphalt tie-down hollows on the runway that are only about as big as your cupped hands. And
they can survive in tiny little puddles on the runway. These things are truly hardcore. And I should stress that nobody told me we shouldn't be concerned or alarmed even at the vernal pools that are vanishing right now today. But there might be some reason to hope.
Yeah, luckily they're very tough species. They withstand the disturbance and stuff. And so if you dig a hole that holds water long enough, most of the plants and fairy shrimp will do just fine. If you pave it over with a parking lot, no way.
If we don't completely destroy the remaining vernal pools, it seems the extraordinary creatures that call them home might just find a way to hang on. Science Quickly is produced by Jeff Del Vicio, Tulika Bose, and Kelso Harper. Music by Dominic Smith. Don't forget to subscribe to Science Quickly wherever you get your podcasts. Just head over to scientificamerican.com, for in-depth science news. For Science Quickly, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Welcome to A Cup of Health with CDC, a weekly feature of the MMWR, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. I'm your host, Dr. Kathleen Dooling. From a very young age, we're encouraged to eat fruits and vegetables. Unfortunately, many Americans are not getting the message. Dr. Seung-Hee Lee Kwon is with CDC's National Center for Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion. She's joining us today to discuss the importance of eating enough fruits and vegetables. Welcome to the show, Seung-Hee.
Thank you for having me.
Seung-Hee, what is the recommended amount of fruits and vegetables?
The federal guidelines recommend that adults consume at least 1.5 cups to 2 cups of fruit and 2 to 3 cups of vegetables each day. This is for adults who get less than 30 minutes of physical activity a day. Adults who are more physically active need more calories and thus should be eating more fruits and vegetables. 1 cup is about 12 strawberries or 1 large tomato.
How many people consume the recommended amount of fruits and vegetables?
We found that very few adults are getting enough fruits and vegetables. Just 12% are eating the recommended amount of fruits, and less than 1 in 10 eat enough vegetables. And consumption is lower among men, young adults, and adults living in poverty.
Why is eating a diet rich in fruits and vegetables so important?
Eating a diet rich in fruits and vegetables can help with 3 things. 1, it can reduce the risk of many leading causes of illness and deaths, such as heart disease, type 2 diabetes, some cancers, and even obesity. It can also add important nutrients that are commonly missing in Americans' diet. And it can help with weight management if adults consume fruits and vegetables instead of other calorie-dense foods.
How can we meet the recommended daily intake of fruits and vegetables?
Try to fill half of your plate with fruits or vegetables at each meal or every eating occasion. Making fruits and vegetables the focal point of your meal will help you meet your recommendations. For example, recent studies have shown that adults get most of their fruit during breakfast and snacks. So you can try adding berries to your morning oatmeal or grab a piece of fresh fruit as an afternoon snack. For vegetables, most adults eat them at dinner, so try adding more into your lunch by adding a side salad or packing a snack of baby carrots or grape tomatoes.
Are canned or frozen products just as good as fresh?
All forms of fruits and vegetables count towards meeting the recommendations. For the most health benefits, make sure that the fruits and vegetables you consume have a limited amount of salt, butter, sugar, or creamy sauces. When selecting canned fruits, choose the ones with lowest sugars. And for canned or frozen vegetables, choose those lower in sodium.
Where can listeners get more information about eating a healthy diet?
Listeners can go to cdc.gov/nutrition or choosemyplate.gov.
Thanks, Seung-Hee. I've been talking today with Seung-Hee Lee Kwon about the importance of eating a healthy diet. Eating a diet rich in fruits and vegetables can help reduce the risk of many leading causes of illness and death and add important nutrients to your diet. Make sure you're eating enough. Until next time, be well. This is Dr. Kathleen Dooling for A Cup of Health with CDC. For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we our resistance radio.
Tiptoeing around the democratic process, Indiana's Republican legislature has become the latest of that ilk to slap its local school librarians with an idiotic book ban. Snuck into law behind closed doors, the partisan Hoosier law requires librarians to pull books that the learned lawmakers consider, quote, harmful to minors. Just to juice up the ignorance and arrogance of their ban, the law criminalizes failure to comply by punishing librarians with up to 2.5 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. What constitutes harmful to minors? Indiana's priggish politicians declared nudity, sexual references, and offensive content to community standards to be violations. Obviously, then, books commanding that rape victims marry their rapists, as well as celebrating daughters who seduce their father to bear his children, plus endorsement of bestiality, copulation in church, women boiling their children for food, and so god-awful much more, have to be ripped from the shelves and burned. Only all of this is enshrined in the Bible, which is urged on Indiana's youngsters in Sunday schools, conveniently placed in the bedstands of every chain hotel and cited by pious lawmakers as their moral compass. The so-called Good Book is replete with the gross and explicit sexual material that Republican book censors call harmful. Indeed, a feisty civil libertarian organization named Freedom from Religion Foundation gives away book labels you can stick in Bibles, warning that, quote, literal belief in this book may endanger your health and life. This is Jim Hightower saying the books that right-wing autocrats want to ban are not pornographic. They just explore ideas that those politicians don't like, ideas that young people are already grappling with. And by the way, why not require these pious lawmakers to disclose what licentious material they've been reading before they dictate what we read?
20 years after the United States government began locking up people in Guantanamo Bay, why are prisoners still there, not yet having had a trial? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. Some are in Gitmo because although they've been cleared for release, that is, they've been found to not pose a danger, they can't be returned to their home country. Others are there because they were so relentlessly tortured that a trial isn't possible, so they just sit. George W. Bush, whose administration set up the Gitmo detention facility, by the end of his second term said, quote, he very much wanted to close Gitmo. Barack Obama, early on, committed to closing it, but he didn't. Donald Trump said that Gitmo was a good way to deal with, quote, bad dudes, and signed an executive order to keep it open. President Joe Biden, in contrast, early on said he wanted to close Gitmo, but that hasn't happened yet either. It's time. It's past time that the administration figured out how to make that happen. After all, how can the United States stand as a beacon for the rule of law when our prison in Guantanamo still holds prisoners day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade, with, for most, no trial and no end in sight? The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1972. That was the day that employees at the Farrah Manufacturing Company went out on strike. The company was one of the top producers of men's and boys' pants in the country, and the second largest employer in El Paso, Texas. The majority of workers were Chicano. More than 80% were women. These workers worked long hours for low wages and were required to meet a high quota demand. In the late 1960s, some of the male employees began to discuss their working conditions and what they could do to change things. One employee remembered the early days of organizing sometimes happened after softball games between the teams of workers from the different departments in the plant. We'd sit around after the game and talk about these things and the union. Men working in the cutting room voted to affiliate with the Amalgamated Clothing Workers of America. Workers from the San Antonio plant came to El Paso to support the union effort. These workers were fired. In response, 500 El Paso workers walked off the job. They demanded the right to have a union. Soon, more than 3,000 FARA employees went out on strike. The strike cause won the support of the Roman Catholic bishop in El Paso, who supported a boycott against FARA pants. The AFL-CIO called for a boycott. The campaign against FARA soon spread across the country. Even though the company brought in scab replacement labor, the effort to get a union continued. The fight wore on until March of 1974, when the National Labor Relations Board found in favor of the employees who had been fired. Unionization had come to FARA. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the continental United States of America, where it is currently 48 degrees Fahrenheit, mostly cloudy. Expecting highs in the low 70s with a mix of clouds and sun. Winds will be light and variable. Some passing clouds overnight with lows in the mid to upper 40s. Winds out of the west at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And then a mix of clouds and sun in the morning tomorrow, followed by cloudy skies during the afternoon with a chance of a rain shower or two throughout the afternoon and evening. Highs will be in the low to mid 70s. Winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Grass pollen is rated high in Rogue River itself here, and the air quality index for the region is in the good range at 17 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is very high at level 8. Barometric pressure is rising at 30.11 inches. Visibility is at 10 miles. And relative humidity is at 99%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 65 and mostly cloudy. Paris is 62 with showers in the vicinity, and they are in a flood watch. Rome is 76 and sunny. Kyiv is 56 degrees and mostly cloudy. Kabul is 60 degrees and clear. Hong Kong is 75 and fair. Tokyo is 56 and clear. Sydney, Australia is 55 degrees and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 54 degrees and mostly cloudy, and New York, New York is 62 degrees Fahrenheit and fair. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Workers at a Goodyear tire plant in Mexico voted yesterday, Monday, to throw out an old guard union that was accused of stealing a ballot box in a failed union election last month. The skullduggery at the plant in the north-central state of San Luis Potosi illustrated the uphill battle Mexican workers face in unseating old guard unions that once kept wages low and enjoyed government protection. The Labor Department said employees voted 727 to 140 against renewing the labor contract held by a union affiliated with the Confederation of Mexican Workers. The vote opens the way for a new union organizing drive at the plant. The Confederation of Mexican Workers, or CTM, for decades functioned as a wing of the old ruling Institutional Revolutionary Party, the PRI. By signing contracts behind workers' backs, such unions long held Mexican industrial wages to about 1/8 or less of what workers earned doing similar jobs in the U.S. Mexico's Labor Department said fraud occurred at the plant in April. Eyewitnesses and video cameras saw when people associated with the old guard union stole the ballot box used by workers at the Goodyear plant to vote in a previous election whose results were thrown out. It was evident that after the voting concluded, the members of that union, possibly in collusion with the company's security guards, stole the ballot box, the department said in a statement. The department vowed at the time to redo the elections with exceptional security measures without any intervention by the union that holds the contract and with the participation of domestic and international observers. The department said that observers from the International Labor Organization, the country's Human Rights Commission, and independent groups oversaw the new vote yesterday, Monday. It was the latest in a series of votes to oust old guard unions at automotive and other plants throughout Mexico. The votes have often come only after the United States has filed complaints under the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Free Trade Agreement.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Giovanna Chech of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Thousands marched in silence yesterday, Monday, in Serbia in a major outpouring of grief and anger against the populist government and how it reacted after two mass shootings last week that left 17 people dead and 21 wounded, many of them children. The gatherings in Belgrade and the northern city of Novi Sad were dubbed Serbia Against Violence. They were called by opposition parties, which demanded the resignations of government ministers and the withdrawal of licenses to the state-controlled mainstream media that promote violence and often host convicted war criminals and crime figures on their programs. After the protest officially ended, some of the protesters chanted slogans against Serbia's increasingly autocratic president, Alexander Vučić, demanding that he step down as they passed by government headquarters in Belgrade. The president later dismissed the protest as shameful during an interview on pro-government Happy television. He accused the opposition of abusing people's grief for their political ends and inciting violence. The shootings on Wednesday in Belgrade at an elementary school and on Thursday in a rural area south of the capital left the nation stunned. They triggered calls to encourage tolerance and rid society of widespread hate speech and a gun culture stemming from the 1990s wars. Education Minister Branko Rucic submitted his resignation on Sunday, and authorities launched a gun crackdown. but opposition said this was too little, too late. One of the largest anti-government protests in recent years in Serbia also reflected how rattled the nation has been by the shootings. The school shooting on Wednesday was the first in Serbia's recent history. A 13-year-old boy took his father's guns and opened fire at the school he attended in the heart of Belgrade, shooting his peers and killing 7 girls, 1 boy, and a school guard. A day later, a 20-year-old man used an automatic weapon in a shooting rampage in 2 villages in central Serbia, randomly killing 8 people and wounding 14. Prosecutors said that he has confessed to the killings and said he wanted to spread fear among residents, state media have reported. Earlier on Monday, police deployed in schools throughout Serbia in an effort to restore a shaken sense of security as children largely returned to classes. Teams of experts have been sent with the backing of UN Children's Agency UNICEF, offering support and guidelines for children, their parents, and teachers. All right, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.